Okay, so who is it? Here,
Whitetail.
deer. Okay, hey, there's huge dew claws in there. Why isn't this a pig?
Pointy.
Pointy toes,
Super
moving
pointy.
faster.
And what?
Moving faster.
Can pigs move
Oh,
fast?
pigs
Yeah,
can
pigs can move
fly.
fast, yeah.
True enough.
They
Good
don't.
point.
They don't have the leg to be able to like jump.
They might not
Sounds
move
like
this fast.
Right,
you
right.
know?
Mm.
But when you get a big pig running fast, the gallops of pigs can be very impressive. Is the point of that takeaway. Because also, if we think of it, yeah. We'll leave it at that. So, but what about the dew claws? How do we know right away by looking at those dew claws they're not pigs? They're straight behind the tracks.
Right.
So you might get the tiniest fraction of dew claw that extends a little bit outside. So if we were to draw lines along the walls of the tracks and extend those lines all the way back, the dew claws basically fall well within inside those lines, right? If this were a pig, those dew claws fall extremely outside those lines. They're just built entirely different. Our dew claws of this galloping pig would be out here, okay? So extremely wide set. Right away, that's all we need. You know, we can say these tracks are pointy, but we can also say the pointy parts of these tracks got somewhat obscured, right? So if we were relying on other morphology, that's one thing that we would look at right away and just say, cool, definitely not a pig. It would have been a good question to include actually in this. Anyways,
Is the overall pig shape more X because is it more wider at the top?
that all depends. I mean, they can have a really beefy splay, but then so can deer. I wouldn't, again, for the overall shape of the track, like an X or something, not quite thought about that in those terms. I would just rely more on the actual structure of it and those dew claws on the whole. So, the question was, first off, is this deer just pressing down cleanly, nicely, gently into the ground, or is there energy in these tracks? Okay, so that's telling us. So how many tracks is right here?
One, two.
One.
It's one. How many tracks are here? One. How many tracks right there? One. Okay, cool. So now, right off the bat, is this thing walking?
No.
No. Is it trotting you?
No.
And then, and so coming back to the rhythm, why is this not trotting?
Yeah, that's what I said. Trot because I see a rhythm.
But it's a broken
Well,
gait.
there's a rhythm in everything, of course, but it's not even. Okay, so what we're seeing here is there's a track back there, and then we've got a huge space. There's a track, and then a short space, and then an even shorter space, and then a huge space, and then another. So this is groups of tracks split apart, as opposed to that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 of a walk, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, with that said, there is one huge trot, that big, I call it prancing. It's that big, huge overstep trot, and it's when you see deer or elk love to do this, and they like look over at you and they lift their head and they do this really graceful float, and they kind of tuck their legs up as they're cruising through. And what's happening is that their feet are coming down, a front comes down, and the hind drifts, instead of landing right in it, like we talked about with the walk yesterday, or like with a regular trot where the hind would come right down as well, right in there. They're moving so fast, and they're in such a hanging airborne that foot comes way up beyond it, touchdown. Then there's a big space, and then the front comes down, and then beyond that there's another one. And so that can be weird because it looks kind of like pairs of two, but then they're way apart. But if you were to look at it rhythmically again, it would be evenly spaced, not groups of tracks, but
It's like a flying trot.
it's like a flying trot, exactly. But in this case, we can take that off the table because we've got boom, boom, there's 3 tracks right there. Oh, there's a track. Oh, cool, there's 3 I can see right there, and we know right away we've moved away from a unbroken rhythm into a broken rhythm, right? So which, you know, even just saying that, that's one of those things. Obviously, it's still a rhythm. It's just there's breaks within the tempo. So then, where does that put us in terms of our gait options?
Gallops or lopes?
Great, lopes or gallops. So, I'll draw something out really quick. None of this really matters. We don't care, so to speak. Some people really like to geek out on this stuff. But the only difference between a lope and a gallop, can everybody see that okay? So here's the two fronts, right? So if something reaches out like this, it's cruising out into the world, it's landing, and then the whole body is drifting up past, right? And then it's jumping out again and doing the same thing. So what happens is the two fronts come down, catch, like so. Everybody see those two fronts? And then the hinds come down and they go, ooh. And in this case, say they drift all the way past up and they go boom, and there's one of your things. And then the next pattern would be up here, boom, and the two fronts pass. As patterns are concerned, the only difference between lopes and gallops is whether or not that pair of two hinds actually passes the pair of two fronts. So if the track is back here, that's a lope, or it could even come up to the tracks. Does that make sense? As soon as these two tracks drift all the way past this line of the fronts, it turns into a gallop as a pattern. That's the only difference. There are some differences in what's happening biomechanically, how many airborne, like a lope, there's only one time where the body is entirely off the ground. In a gallop, there's two times. There's one when it's leaping through the air like this, and there's one when all of its legs are up like this and it's sailing through the air. Whee!
So is or gallop versus lope, is there like a species difference, or just that any ungulate can pretty well move either way?
And basically, it's just a matter of speed.
Okay.
So there are animals like caribou that will, and I can never remember, it doesn't matter, but they'll like be in a true gallop but leave a loping pattern, or be in a lope but leave a galloping pattern. And so this is why we don't differentiate, because we just don't really care.
But for purposes of like English department use, if we replace these dots with letters, this would be R, R, F, F. And if it's
This would be
separated-
F, F, R, R.
F, F, R, R. Okay, so right comes
So
the,
fronts
right, okay, got it.
come down first in this. And there's some,
Okay, and that's a
little
that's a
exceptions
loop. Got it.
always.
Okay.
Cool.
And then gallop is going to be
Oh, that's a gallop.
that's a
That's a gallop.
That's a
Gallopers are
gallop.
both in front. The hinds are both in front.
okay. So lope is actually R, R, F, F. No. Okay.
Nope.
That'd be
The
like
lope is still
RF, RF.
R, F, R, F.
Correct.
Okay, that's a lope.
yeah, so as soon as
R, F, R, F.
RR
Thank you,
leave RF and go FFRR, it's then a gallop.
Right, got it. Okay, that actually helps
Alright.
enormously.
Right.
So to Dustin's questions, the mustelids,
Exactly.
low.
Yes. Yeah, but he was referring to ungulates. So
Oh, I actually said ungulate in there somewhere. So
that's, yeah, sorry. So you may have. Thank you for addressing that. There are animals like skunks and otters and weasels and stuff that they've got that slinky motion or that rocking horse motion, and creating true lopes.
I was my thought process is I went to pronghorn
Oh, cool.
because I've been to Wyoming and
It's a prong.
Prong. It's muleys that are pronking. Pronking refers to, and this is actually a cool thing.
versus a stotting.
So pronghorns generally are just runners. They just tear across the landscape at phenomenal
And
speeds
jumpers.
for phenomenal, phenomenal distances. I wish I could remember all of that stuff. They can basically run 60 miles an hour for a couple miles, and then and they do it so fast, and then they stop. No, they have a heart twice the size of a goat, of equivalent size. They've got vacuum cleaner tubes for air pipes. They've got all this specialized arteries and veins and capillaries that keep them cool for running for long distances. Their bones are super thin. It's one of the reasons they don't like to jump, actually, and land on their front, because and there's a book out there,
what I've always wondered, because they always go under the fence.
Going under fences. But apparently, and this is so strange, but there's a book out there called Built for Speed, written by a pronghorn researcher up in Montana that studied them for 20, 25 years. All observational stuff. Phenomenal. The coolest things in there. Anyways, they actually have very thin rubber band bones and tendon systems just built on this core of endurance muscle, and they just blast. So they can run like that. They come back to a slow position. They see phenomenally well too, and then they can recover immediately and do it again, which is unlike cheetahs. They can do it for 400 yards, and then when you watch them, they're all
They look like they're about to die.
yeah, and sometimes maybe they are.
Yeah.
Anyways, and then they can run like 35 miles an hour indefinitely. They just do it. So generally not seeing a lot of pronking with pronghorn. Mule deer, big time pronkers. It's one of the ways in muley and whitetail country you can tell the difference. Mule deer will gallop and lope all the time, but they also pronk. Whitetail deer will gallop and lope, but you don't see them pronk. So if you see a pronking deer, you know it's a mule deer. Okay, and that's where it's pogo sticking. All 4 feet, the fronts are up front, boing. It's basically hopping like a frog, but it's going boom, boom, boom. Okay. Okay, so then back to the question at hand. Which track here is most splayed? This one or this one? The first one. Okay, cool. So, and we all agree that this animal is moving at considerable speed, right? And so it's impressive that this foot. And so right off the bat, which one do you think splays more, fronts or hinds? Fronts, great. So we've got the less splayed, smaller hind foot, but usefully, there's dew claws back here showing. And the dew claws themselves are built differently on fronts and hinds. So dew claws on the hind, smaller, closer together, farther up the leg from the hooves themselves, okay? Dew claws on the front, larger in build, set wider apart and closer towards the hooves. Okay? So, and they also, the hinds on ungulates, if you grab, wait, another cool thing. So what toes are these in a deer? If we compare it to our hand, let's use the front. So just like our hand here, what toes are those?
It's the
2 and 4. 2 and 4.
Yeah, so it's the, and what fingers are those? Index and pinky. Cool. By the way, for those of you moving on to talk about, to teach other folks about all this stuff, some people like numbers, and there are instances where numbers are useful, like if you're talking about the hind foot, sometimes blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I prefer using our own body to talk about things. If you say the thumb of something, it makes a lot more sense, especially for new people, than saying, take a look at toe 5, and they're like, what? Take a look at the pinky. Oh, fuck, there's the pinky, you know? Cool. So it can just close a gap much quicker for folks when they can see their own bodies and the bodies of animals. Anyways, so this is a, we'll just assume that this is a right foot. In fact, actually, let's do this. We'll put it to work. Okay. Would someone, James, or Jim, sorry, would you straddle the trail and tell us which direction that track is pointing and which direction that track is pointing?
Which direction they're pointing?
Yeah, whether they're canted.
That one's pointing that way.
Okay, and the other? Well,
More
exactly. So we've got one canted out this way and one canted out that way. Which one is the left and which one's the right? Coming back to some of the lessons from yesterday.
That's going to be the left.
That's left. Great. So coming back to this, we've got a right front. So this is a pointer finger right here, middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. Okay. Where's the thumb?
Inside the.
Yep.
Inside the wrist.
It's gone.
Right. It's gone
It's gone.
altogether.
Yeah. They evolved away from it. What's kind of neat with pronghorn is they evolved entirely away from pointer and pinky finger. They don't even have those, which is kind of cool. So they're walking on the middle finger and the ring finger, and they are walking on the nails of the middle finger and ring finger. And the wrist bones have fused together, these two wrist bones have fused together into one long piece called the cannon bone, right? It's a big, heavy bone. That's the one that's all spindly on pronghorn. And so, kind of cool just to think about. And also, on that note, what's neat about that is that when you're looking at a deer bed, or an elk bed, or a pronghorn bed, or a bison bed, that's why you see the whole shape of the body like this, and then there's two round marks like so. These are the wrists, okay? This is the hind foot right here, and with that hind leg curled underneath it. Sorry, I drew that upside down. That might look very strange from that side. Curve of the back, but anyway, these are the wrist marks, and that's that cannon bone folding all the way back underneath. It's kind of cool. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the map. The other thing about the dew claws on the front feet is that they splay almost to the point where they can point straight out the sides, whereas they are physically incapable of that on the hind. They can splay when you really put them under pressure, but you just don't see it very often. So when you see these larger, wider set dew claws pointing straight out to the sides, you can see that back here really nicely. Can everybody look at that one? See that? That beast? I mean, that's actually kind of pointing forward, but we've got more angle compared to these more blade-like dew claws, more forward-facing, okay? So front or hind? Front. Cool. All right.